Okay, so this is an overview of how I mask black and white negatives. And hopefully the earlier lessons will have helped you get acquainted with how I use a densitometer and understand density range. All that background comes into play now. So I decided to do a slideshow to try to get a handle on how, because masking is, it's kind of complicated in that you make films and you discard them. So you make them just to make an intermediate film, and then sometimes you'll make more than one, and as you'll see, and so I'll try to make it as clear as possible. And it took me a long time to come up with this way of working, and it works for me, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. So this is a scene that we shot, or I shot, to gather my normal processing, my normal exposure. And it captures mainly the detail that I wanted between zone 7 and 3, and that's where all the information is packed on this image. But you'll notice that the local contrast between the black and zone 2 and below zone 3 is really low in contrast. This is what I meant when in the beginning I had said that a fine print would have good local contrast, and this picture does not have good local contrast. And normally when you photograph a scene, you don't have such a large area of zone 2. I mean, zone 2 is before it becomes black, and there's detail there, but there's so little that normally it occupies a small area in a picture, not such a large area as this one does. But I did this intentionally because I knew I was going to mask it. So you'll notice that there's good detail between 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Above 7 it gets pretty white because I shot this on a day that was had no clouds in the sky, and I put the whiteboard in the sun, and I put the velvet in the shadow so that it wouldn't expose any of the film. And that dark gray cardboard I also put in the shadow, knowing that it would have some substance there, but nothing to delineate detail clearly. So the normal exposure worked okay, and it produced this negative. Now the negative obviously is the opposite, and you can see that the velvet is an exposed film. It's very clear, and the gray card, as in the shadow next to it, has more density, but it doesn't have a lot more. But you can see there's a separation there, and the white board in the sun is the darkest area there. I think that was zone 9 1/3. So you're not going to be able to see much detail there. It's so high up on the curve. So the density range is mainly, again, between zone 3 and zone 7. And when we use masking, typically, or at least when I do masking for black and white Nate, typically what I want to retain good, clean blacks. Don't forget, a dense black, a true D max, is going to last longer in the long run. If you have a D max at 2.4 toned, selenium toned, it'll fade to 1.9 over a period of 25, 30 years. Obviously, if you start with 1.9, in 30 years, your blacks aren't going to be nearly as strong. So starting with good, strong, now blacks like this should not have detail because you want just solid blacks. But then right next to that, all those areas of black, you want detail, and that's what gives that area good local contrast. Okay, so typical masking is done in this way. It's to lift the dark shadow detail that you normally don't see while maintaining good blacks. So in order to do that, the first stage mask that I make is done with a high contrast film called Kodalith. And Kodalith is a line film made for graphic arts purposes, and it's meant to be developed in a high contrast developer. When I started off using Kodalith for this purpose, I used to develop in D11. When D11 was no longer offered by Eastman Kodak, I switched to D19, which worked fine. And now I think, I don't even know if you can get D19 from Kodak, but there's companies out there that have taken Kodak's recipes and they offer these developers. I'll probably have to, I don't remember the name of that company, but anyway, I'll get to it and probably put it in the comments so that you can order from these places. Another thing I want to mention is you have to have a registration system. So when you make a mask, you've got to place it precisely in contact with the original negative and come back after it's dry. You have to come back and place it precisely in that same position. So there's a punch system. You punch holes in the edge of the film on both the original as well as the Kodalith, and it goes into those holes go into these pins, and it's placed in a contact easel and a contact frame, which holds the film in perfect contact within these pins. So there is a registration system which I purchased from Warren Condit. I think they're in Connecticut. I think they're in Connecticut. And I don't know if they're still in business. I bought this, 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. Still works fine. I have it both the 4x5 and 8x10 film sizes. But any good machine shop can make a registration system for you. And when I get to the next session, I will be hands-on showing you how I use this equipment. So this part of the video is just an overview to give you a better idea of what we're going to do before we go into the darkroom. Okay, so again, we use Kodalith, which is an orthochromatic film, which means you can use it under red light, which helps, so you can see in the darkroom when you're doing this. And here is a mask that I made. So this is made on Kodalith, contacted with the original, and I process it in D11 for 2 minutes, about 70 degrees. And notice that the black velvet is the darkest item in this film. And that gray card in the shadow is not clear, but it's, so if I give too much exposure, that gray card is going to come up too dark. And what I want is I want good separation between the velvet and that dark gray card in the right hand side of this image. So even though I got that separation there's not enough. So what I do is I make a couple of these. In this case, I made 2 identical sheets of film punched, and then I bleach it. So I use a ferric cyanide bleach and hypo. It's referred to as farmer's reducer. It comes in two parts. One part is just plain hypo, and the other part is the ferric cyanide crystals. And I use a small amount of crystals, and I put in a small tray of water. And I don't mix the two. I bleached the image first for a minute, and then you put it back, and you put it into the hypo, and it'll clear. And you keep doing this until you get the right amount of bleaching. The idea is to bleach away that cardboard and not bleach away the black velvet. You want good separation there, because that's where the mask is going to be, needs to have density. I need density on that dark cardboard. But hopefully the black velvet will remain clear on the mask, so I can build up the density. So basically the mask I want is going to dodge that cardboard for me, and it's not going to dodge the black velvet. So if you think of printing in the darkroom, you're familiar with darkroom printing, you may use your hand or a tool to dodge that cardboard. Well, masking is perfect dodging, because it's pin registered, it's an analog photographic technique. You don't have any edge effects. You can get an edge effect if the mask is too strong. But finesse masking is what I'm most interested in. So when I was younger, I used to make these really strong masks, but I don't generally do that anymore. I try to do it so that you don't notice that there's a mask there. Okay, so I make 2 of these, and then I bleach it. Now here are the 2 after they've been bleached. You don't need to bleach both exactly, because they're going to be sandwiched. They're going to be put together and made into one mask. The fence on the left-hand side still retained some black on the bottom sheet. And the top sheet, it was completely bleached away. Let's go back to this one here. Yeah, so you can see a before and after. This is how both sheets looked before bleaching, and this is how both sheets looked after I bleached them. Now, when I combine the two, because I have a pin register system, when I put them both on the same pin, this is what I get. So now I have good contrast between the velvet and that cardboard to the right of it. The cardboard's been completely removed through bleaching. And I did remove some of the density from the velvet, but not nearly as much. And especially when I combine 2 films together, I get a good density range between the velvet, black velvet, and that dark cardboard in shade. And you'll notice that the fence now has some blacks there, which I wanted. And now towards the end you'll see why, because you want to retain, don't forget, this first stage of the mask is meant to hold the blacks. Whatever is on this mask will block the light from affecting the main mask. So exposure will be allowed through these dark areas, and you can get stronger blacks. Okay? So, and you can make 3. You don't need to stop at 2 sheets, because the mask that's going to be made is made with diffusion. So it's basically a little bit out of focus. So you can actually use 3 sheets of Kodalith if you need to do that in order to get this kind of separation. Okay, so here, let's go to this next slide. This is the main mask that I made. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that the black velvet is clearer than that dark gray card. The dark gray card is darker, and that's what we want, because we want to dodge that black gray card, the dark gray card, and not dodge the black velvet. And if we mathematically look at this, okay, what we're talking about is a good density range between those two objects. This shows the measurements I took off of the two Codalith first stage masks that I made. When I combine them two, this is, okay, so I get a difference of 0.79 minus 0.06. So now the density range between the black velvet and the dark gray card is more than 2 stops. It's more than, 0.3 being 1 stop, right? If we go back to this slide, you can see that if I was to only use one sheet, I would have 1/2 that density range. 0.3 is the lower is the dark gray card. I'm getting about 0.4 on the black velvet. So I only get 1 stop here of difference. So when I combine the 2 sheets again, okay, putting them both on the pins, this is now achieved a greater contrast between those 2 areas. Notice that the white card remains clear in every case because the original negative is so dark that it doesn't give any exposure to the line film. Okay. So when I combine these 2 masks with the original neg, this is what I get. So it plugs up, the black velvet now is being plugged up, and you can see that the dark gray card is not. So when I put these 2 Codalith films on top of the original, the new film, the main mask is going to be exposed now, is going to be exposed with these 2 masks in place. And this is what I get. And you can see that the density range now, first of all, the white card is clear. So the highlights basically are allowed to come through that mask. The black velvet is not perfectly clear, but is pretty clear. We've got on the mask a density of 0.26, but on the dark gray card in the shade, we got 0.44. So now we're dodging the black velvet by 0.26, but we're dodging the gray card by even more, by 0.44. So this tells me that when so after this film is done and dried, it's going to be placed on the original neg. And the first stage masks are discarded. Now we don't need those first 2 lithofilms. Okay, so when this is in place on the original neg, let's say that I made the test print with 10 seconds. The first image that I showed in this slideshow. Now I'm going to need more than 10 seconds. For one thing, the black is being dodged by almost 1 stop. So I could probably go to close to 20 seconds in order to, I could double the exposure, and my blacks are going to get virtually the same density on the print. Because don't forget, 0.3 equals 1 stop. So I go to 20 seconds. Okay. Now what's going to happen? The dark gray card is going to be lighter. because it's being blocked by half a stop, more than 1.44. So 0.15 being half a stop. Even if I was to double the exposure, that dark gray card is being dodged. Does that make sense? And also, the white card, which measures 0.10. If I double the exposure, I'm going to get more exposure for my highlights. And so all around, I will be getting better shadows, shadow detail, better blacks, and better separation in my high values all the way up to white. As long as I have enough density range overall, which, if you recall, I'm shooting for 1.6, at least 1.65, then I'm not going to lose my whites. Pretty technical, huh? But it's not rocket science. It's simple math. But logistically, you have to think in terms of flip-flopping the scene and the shadows, but not the high values, and that's how masking works. And for some reason, I just gravitated toward this in the late 70s and enjoyed doing this. Actually, in color, as well as black and white. But in any case, one thing I wanted to mention is the masking film is, okay, let's look at the masking film. This is a picture of how the box that it came with Kodak. Now they don't make this anymore, and the masking film is processed in HC110. I think I used dilution F, 7 degrees at 4 minutes, and that has to be handled in total darkness. Again, the masking film is punched and placed into these pins and contacted with the original, while the original also has those first stage masks in it. Okay, so all said and done, the first stage masks are discarded. The main mask is now sandwiched with the original negative, placed between glass, and then I make the print. So again, this is the original print that I made unmasked. This is the original neg without a mask, and this is the print with a mask. And both prints are just straight prints. There's no burning or dodging here. And same filtration, same contrast grade paper. And what you'll notice is that you get good local contrast now between that black velvet and that dark gray card in the shade. Let's look at it again. See that? And that. So, and you'll also notice that there's more sheen in that white card in the sun, all the way to the left there. You have to kind of look closely. So what I did was, I made this section for you to look at, and if you look closely at the black velvet against the gray card, the dark gray card, between the left side and the right side, you'll notice you have much better local contrast. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said that a fine print has good local contrast as well as good overall contrast. Because if you have good blacks and good whites in the print, and with detail leading up to the whites and details leading up to the black, sometimes even though you have that, it's still not, the print still doesn't sing. There's not enough local contrast. Okay, it may have overall contrast, but when you zoom in a certain area, it just looks flat. And that's exactly what you see on the left side print. Whereas on the right hand side, you see the contrast between the velvet and the detail above the velvet. Okay? And here is a close-up of the fence. Now, it's hard to really see what I mean, but you'll notice that. Okay, remember I said that in the first stage mask, in the fence area, I did not bleach it completely clear, and this is why. Because next, in between those wooden panels of fence, you've got some black, and you'll notice that even the grain in the wood separates from the other parts of the wood much clearer. It's because the mask is perfect. There's no way you can dodge in between those panels and in between the grains, whereas a mask does exactly that. And if you were to look at the original print rather than the slideshow, it would be a lot more evident. I remember when I was testing my outline on this presentation with John Gasser. John is the son of Adolf Gasser, and he's been in the industry for as long as anybody, I think. And he said, Tim, I want to see it before and after. I said, okay, so I'll get to that, because when I was preparing these lectures, I had to do all this work. And when I finally finished this print, it's just an 8 by 10. And he looked at it, and I said, okay, here is a before and after. This is without a mask, and this is with a mask. Straight prints. And he says, I can actually see the separation in the wood panels, in the grain of the wood panels. I said, because that's what a mask does. It's perfect. You don't always get the best lighting that would fall on this panel of wood that would delineate that grain in such a way that you can feel the three-dimensional character of that wood panel. Sometimes you'll come across a scene and the lighting will just be perfect, and your exposure will be just perfect, and your processing will be perfect. And you don't need to mask it. You just print it, and wow, look at that wood panel. But you don't always have that kind of situation. Well, masking can make it look like you have really good local contrast, even though it may have been a hazy day, or and the light was diffused in such a way that you don't have this look. But if you want that kind of look, and film masking, then you can take that scene in front of you and say, okay, if I shoot it this way and I mask it this way, I can make it look like it was lit in this manner. So masking kind of gives you an added tool, aside from the zone system and visualizing, because the zone system really allows you to see a dark area that may be luminous with a lot of detail, but because you're not interested in that, you want to capture the waterfall or something else in the scene and have the eye go towards that. You can intentionally expose that scene so that the waterfall captures your eye with a lot of detail, and you allow that luminous shadow to go black, and the picture will absolutely work. It's not necessary, most of the time it's not necessary, to try to get all the detail that's in front of your camera. Matter of fact, just like color can be distracting in a photograph, detail can be distracting. So you have to judiciously use the tools that you have to expose and process your film to get that feeling that you come across that makes you stop, pull out your tripod, your camera, and you're shooting it because of something you felt. And what you felt about that scene, that area that you're going to photograph, doesn't match what you see. It's more of a feeling than something your eyes are seeing. So you have to use all these tools and try to capture on a final print that feeling. And masking is just another tool. Okay, so that's masking. And you might want to watch this a couple of times because I know that it's not easy to grasp first, second, even the third time. It took me a long time to get a handle on masking, and I've taught many people. I've never done this where I put it out on the internet or just offered classes to strangers. You have to understand, I was in the business of making photographs from other people's films, and this was a trade secret of mine. So I shared it, of course, with my employees. I trained many people, and interestingly enough, no one really gravitated toward it. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of steps. And each step, you have to visualize what you're doing. And no one really understood it to the point where I could just say, okay, take this and mask it. I always had to say, okay, this mask is too dark. I need you to bleach this and do that, and then it would come out right. But hopefully someone out there, internet land, is going to run with this, and you can take old negatives that you've shot and mask it, and you'll be surprised at the difference you'll see. Sometimes the differences are very small, but a small difference can make a big difference in terms of feeling. And that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I used to mask heavily, especially in color, and because you want your lab to look better than someone else's lab. But now that I'm retired, I wanted to share this. It always, I did offer a software product back in the mid '80s to labs who were willing to pay for it to learn how to make good color negatives from color transparencies. And back then we didn't have the internet. We had a bulletin board, and this little Apple computer in the corner of my brother's room, and people would get this password, and when they bought the software, they'd be able to access the bulletin board. And on that bulletin board, I wrote articles such as this. Not this particular one, but I wrote an article on tricolor masking and how to make and that in that case I gave them very specific aims, how to use the grayscale, to how dark to make the highlight mask, and then the main mask, and then when you made your 3 exposure color editing, I gave them precise aims. And Richard Poltowski was the only one who followed this outline. Pages and pages of instructions, and he did it. And he came to a trade show and he showed me this print. Here's what I did. I said, well, that's perfect. Now you no masking, and just run with it. He goes, well, now right there. And I said, well, think about it. I mean, if you switch the mask around, you can get different effects, and the more you do, the more you're going to learn. So that led me to hire Richard. He came out to San Francisco and worked for me for many, many years. We're really good friends now, and I'm so lucky to have him as a colleague. Anyway, so this is the outline I'm asking, and I hope it makes sense. The next session will be me in a darkroom showing you how to prepare films and how to punch, and that's pretty straightforward. This is actually the meat and potatoes of masking, but I'll show you how I do it in the next video. And like I said, you should watch this a couple of times, at least a couple of times, and ask me if anything I said did not make sense. I'll try to get back to you, okay? All right, that's it for now.